Hello and welcome to Love Fools with me, your host, Terri Shield, where we are hopelessly devoted to exploring and embodying the universal language of love. Love Fools is brought to you by Love School, where we explore loving self, others, and everything. Join us there for deeper exploration at www.loveschool.uk. Now for today's episode. Hello, welcome to this episode of Love Fools. I am Terri Shield. I'm your host for this episode. And in this one, we're going to explore love, healing, and being alone. We're going to do a little bit of a deep dive into the idea of loneliness and isolation and why we might get put into a phase or find ourselves in a phase of isolation and going through the process of feeling lonely and dealing with our loneliness as part of a healing or recovery journey. Thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate you listening to the episode. Do let me know in the comments if you've got any questions or any feedback as we're going through, and I can always create new episodes based on anything you want to deep dive in and explore, all based around the topic of love, loving yourself, loving others, loving life, whatever it might be that we are experiencing as much as possible. And loneliness is like one of those things, isn't it, that we're almost kind of taught to avoid, to fear, even in many ways. And I'll unpack some of that as we go through. But what I've realized is not only for myself, but for many other people, as part of a healing and recovery process, especially if we are dealing with wounds, trauma, or any sort of loss related to relationships, relating to other people, we very often require a period of solitude. And this can be recovering from things like abuse, neglect, bullying, or even bereavements, addictions. They are often like this phase of solitude, isolation, ending up being alone and facing ourselves by ourselves, kind of becomes a foundation of the healing and recovery process. And many of the circumstances that we can find ourselves in or working through when we are in a healing and recovery process can actually be enhanced through the fact that we are alone and by working through our feelings of loneliness. And even if we are not choosing it, so sometimes we might choose to isolate ourselves, to spend some time alone, to take some space. Other times it can be put upon us. You know, circumstances can happen where that's kind of almost like thrust upon us. And then other times it could just happen naturally. So we end up going through something that causes like a massive change in our life. And the response to that change from other people can be that we're left alone. And I mean, we could do a whole episode diving in just into that, about how other people respond to our trauma, our stress, our circumstances. But the actual process of healing changes us, and often people aren't very good at dealing with change. And even though it's like 2025 and we're going through this kind of, I think, kind of human evolution of consciousness and emotion, we can still find it really, really difficult to support each other through tough times. And also, if we're all going through tough times ourselves or recovered from a tough time, or even have discovered for ourselves the benefits of solitude, when in a healing and recovery process, we might choose to back off from people, realizing either consciously or subconsciously that they need a bit of a phase. So often, sometimes it can be a natural end or completion of relationships or friendships, connections, and that sort of thing. Sometimes good friends and things can even set that boundary for us to protect themselves or to protect the relationship during particularly difficult times. When we heal, like, we change. Something about us has to change in the healing process. It's a bit like, I mean, the simplest way to think of it is if you have like a cut or a burn, say, like on your skin, on your body, and then it heals and mends, often we're left with a scar. So even though we might go through this phase of healing and repair the wound might no longer be vulnerable or so there still kind of be a mark. So we are like changed by whatever it was that caused the need for healing. And that can be the same for like trauma and emotional wounds as well. Like I say, especially if it's then a relational wound where it's happened in relationships, it could fundamentally change us on a level of who we are, how we connect with people energetically, spiritually. It can affect us. That means that some people just don't resonate anymore or aren't relevant in the nicest possible way in our life anymore. Like, I think we've got friends for a reason, friends for a season, and friends for life. Some people come and go at different times for different reasons, and some relationships have served their purpose at the point of a healing process kind of beginning, or through a healing process at the end of a process. And like recovery, so like recovery is like this process of finding ourselves again. Like, who are we after this event? Who are we now? We have this change, and the recovery process realigns us. So this is all like part of it. Like, sometimes people just aren't aligned anymore with this new version of us that we have to become because of whatever it is that we've been through. Sometimes even we might, find a part of ourselves or want more for ourselves or different for ourselves as a response to like whatever it is we're healing or recovering from or through. And we realize certain people or certain situations we were in or very used to, certain environments we used to frequent, like, aren't in our best interests, that we don't want that influence in our life anymore, or we certainly don't need it while we're trying to recover, or we need the space to reflect on them and things. So all of this can kind of begin to happen in a healing and recovery process that leave us in this space of aloneness and solitude. So actually, like, choosing and taking space, or however it happens, circumstances, the universe, however you want to look at it, gives us space to be by ourselves. It kind of gives us that opportunity to discover or rediscover who we are, and especially without people pleasing. People pleasing actually takes quite a lot of energy, and I think intuitively, like, we know that, we might not realize it consciously, but always try to please other people and mold ourselves to circumstances can be quite exhausting. This is very often like if you have any sort of conditions like fatigue a lot of the time, low energy, brain fog stuff. This can be as a direct symptom from people pleasing, because it's exhausting. Trying to figure out what other people want all the time, like, and please people all the time, is incredibly draining. So like, if we have to focus on ourselves for a healing and recovery process, which also takes a lot of energy, like I say, whether it's consciously, subconsciously, whatever, however you want to look at it, our energy will be redirected. And often it can just literally be by removing certain people. Like, it might, like I say, just be through losing that inspiration ourselves to contact people feeling that resistance to get in touch with us, not vibing with people. So like I say, it just becomes so exhausting, you don't even want to put other people in your space, or having even the inclination to make contact, that sort of thing. And these phases, so when we're like not people pleasing anymore and focusing on ourselves, it gives us all that extra available energy that we were given to other people, we were given away, externalizing for ourselves, so we can use it as we need it, figure out what we need, figure out like I say, it might not even be figuring that out. That might be a process, like a shadow work process we might have to do if we've had relational trauma things, we're very confused about our own needs and things. If it's like even something physical, I'm talking about here, if we're healing from something physical, we might need, our body might need that energy for ourselves. And so like I say, it just naturally happens that people will like move out of our energy field, move out of our experience, just to give us that extra energy to focus on ourselves and allow our bodies to redirect that energy where it needs to go into the healing and recovery process. And like going back to looking at like relational trauma and stuff, if we're recovering, and this might even, it might not even be relational trauma, it might be like addiction or grief or something like that. It gives us a chance to reevaluate. So through this like recovery journey, we can look at, well, we get a better sense of what we need because we're by ourselves. We have to meet our own needs, and it's like a prioritizing of our needs. So obviously the things that we need rather than just want, we prioritize first. We tend to meet them first. And then it gives us this like phase where we can start looking at what we actually want from connections. Like, if we're going to connect with somebody and we are going to extend some energy or invite some new energy in to us, what do we want from that connection? And it doesn't have to be like in a selfish way, like as in you're connecting with someone just to take from them or anything like that. It's like mutual, like reciprocal meeting of needs, isn't it? It's like shifting the energy from, especially if, like, say, if we've been stuck in these patterns of giving and not getting back in a reciprocal way, that we certainly need. And in fact, in a healing and recovery journey, it might be that we need to actually take from other people. We need to allow them to give to us. We need to receive, whatever it might be, nurture, love, care, support. And actually, the people who aren't willing to give us that sense that, and will fall away, or like I say, it becomes exhausting for us if we're going through a healing and recovery journey. We're expected to give when actually we need to be receiving, and we're in relationships that aren't willing to do that for us when we need that. It kind of highlights the dynamics of the relationship and the essence of that relationship and how reciprocal it is, etc. So the opportunity that we're given by ourselves, like this space that we find ourselves in, it gives us time to feel and go through the process of whatever it is that we are healing from, recovering through, and reflect on our lives. And without that space, so like if other people are coming into our lives, it can get very muddled. Like our thought processes even can get muddled. Our emotions, especially if you're like an empathic person, you might be picking up other people's emotions, that sort of thing. Like I say, having to focus energy on what's going on in that relationship with other people. That's all very confusing if what you need is some time to self-reflect. And it's actually, I like to think of it now, it's like a gift. If we can use it wisely, if we can use this space wisely, it's very often a gift. Of course, it's really natural to feel at times that sense of loss or grief for others when we're going through a recovery journey. And there have been times, like, so I've had periods of isolation in my life, several times. Sometimes, like I say, it was kind of circumstances made that happen. Sometimes it was like a conscious choice and where I've chosen to kind of step back from relationships because I realized, especially after the first periods of isolation and stuff, that I needed space, or I wanted to see what was happening in my relationships and things. And while we're in the thick of them, that can be really hard to figure out. And the feeling of loneliness can be a heavy one. Like, I'm not trying to like brush over like that as if we don't feel at times very heavily the burden of being alone when we go through these phases. And part of that allowing of the feeling ultimately leads to the healing and the recovery, especially if you like say, especially if you use it wisely and do shadow work and things to figure out, why is this feeling so heavy? What is it that I want? What is it that I feel like I'm missing? What is it that the other the people that I have been connected with were giving me, or what is it that I have been seeking in relationships, etc., etc. The shadow work can help us really understand ourselves and also release any trapped emotions, anything like that. It's really a opportunity to find out more about who we are and what motivates us, how we are in relationships, what we are, what we have been seeking in the past, how we've been seeking it, why. It can be very revealing to see, because a lot of the time we can end up, right, or many of us end up in relationships just to avoid loneliness. So facing the fear, facing the loneliness head on by allowing ourselves to be alone can be very revealing about the types of relationships that we have had or are having, and how we've behaved in them and what we've been exchanging in them, the dynamics, all that sort of thing. And part of like loneliness often is like a sense of grief. Grief and loneliness can kind of intertwine at times, and that might be part of the reason why we like fear it. And grief is a very natural part of like a healing and recovery journey. So whatever it is that you're healing from or recovering from, there's a change involved, and change generally means there's been a loss of something and a renewal of something else. But we have to kind of go through that process of the loss before the renewal happens. And obviously some things affect us more than others. Some things we don't mind losing so much as others. But there is the reality of grief as we're going through a healing process. And it might be that we're like grieving our old lives, grieving an imagined life, grieving for ourselves or grieving for other people. You know, grief can be complex, and I'm actually going to do the next episode all about grief. We're going to like dive into that a little bit. And these two episodes are kind of going to be a little bit linked because they interact with each other in a profound way. Loneliness and grief and healing and recovery. There have been like times in my recovery process. So I've had to isolate, was isolated from people through several different recovery processes. Some of them to do with addiction, some of them to do with trauma, some of them to do with like relational trauma and things, and rape trauma and things like that. And those circumstances, especially when you're dealing with a victim wound of some sort that needs healing, can bring up a lot of stuff. And even just like the sense of being alone can bring up a lot of stuff related to rejection and bullying or being left out, that sort of thing. And there's a lot of conditioning that can go alongside that. Now, it can either be like from society, from our family, from like school and things. This whole like idea of being a loner as like a bad thing, the lone wolf, a bit of a rogue or a bit dangerous. So, being alone means that there's something wrong with you, like inherently wrong with you, if you prefer your own company, or if you're a bit naturally introverted, or if you're a hermit. All of these words, all of these descriptions that we can give to people, being antisocial, they all kind of slightly have this connotation of wrongness to them, don't they? And being alone and facing up to that, whether that's something that comes up internally or what's been projected onto you by other people, or what might kind of come up with like in connections, fears from other people, whatever it might be, can really help us to free ourselves from that conditioning. So, I mean, part of one of our courses that we talk about, we dive into in Freedom from Illusions, is looking at like things like conditioning like that, like how we pick that up. And the idea of being alone and not being part of a group or not being part of society, being connected with wrongness, is kind of like deeply entrenched. And there's also like, even in the spiritual community, right? The coaching and mentorship community, a lot of people will like suggest things like you can't heal alone, you need other people and stuff. And my journey has been a bit back and forth, to be honest, but I've actually spent a lot of time alone and found a lot of healing alone. And I mean, there was times when I've had to reflect, like, is this a trauma response? And there's times when I've had to reflect that, yes, it was. Rightly so. Very hurt by people or in relationships or in society. So I spent time alone, and there was at times like anxiety and things around connecting with people that I had to work through. But sometimes, like, genuinely, I found it really difficult to connect with other people because my process was very different to them. Now, sometimes it's helpful, so we have that contrast, right? So you might be going through something alone, or your own healing process, and then you connect with someone, you talk to someone about it, mention it, and they say something that just either really knocks you off course, can bring up an old wound or something like that. And these things happen for a reason, and sometimes again them sort of triggers and things are helpful, so like even seeking them out consciously is helpful. Sometimes it can just feel a bit vulnerable, like we're not ready for it. And sometimes just going through that phase of where just nobody understands at all, so having conversations with people feels like an absolute chore, or trying to get help or support from people feels like an absolute chore because they just don't get it, they just don't understand where you're at, even if they've been through similar situations, or you're not ready to hear it. You're not ready for like the advice of where they're at. Like, even listen to this now, right? If you're like somebody who's in the depths of a loneliness process, really feeling the pain of loneliness, you might hate some of the things I'm saying and be tempted to switch this off. You know what I mean? Like, loneliness can't be positive. And being alone might feel like a horrible burden, or a horrible place to be fighting and resisting against it and things. And having someone telling you that it's a blessing or it's a gift could be incredibly irritating. I've been there myself, so I do understand. And like, so sometimes these conflict contrasts can like help us, and then other times they can just stop our own natural process, I think. I mean, I have found that navigating all of that again as part of this like balance, this dance between being alone and connecting with people and things, and healing and recovery, learning my discernment, understanding my own energy and stuff has been really, really helpful. And it's all part of it. It's all why it benefits us ultimately. Like, often in those challenges, in that process, in that messy, grapply bit where you like want support and reach out for it, and then the support doesn't quite hit the spot, and you're like left then with a whole new wound. And it's that whole grapple, the messy bit of being alone. I think that's when we go through the thick of it and we can grow the most. We like at these phases, like that messy bit, when I talk, like when I'm saying like this, if we connect with nature, like that messy bit is where you're kind of trying to break through the soil, isn't it? And there can be a lot of fertility for growth in that process, where we take our roots in, where we're like making our space in the world and getting a really strong foundation, even through all these difficulties, messy bit, the dirty bit, the challenging bit. That's how we mature. That's how we evolve and grow, and we can start to like say figure out who we really are underneath it all, and what we really need, and our discernment, and how we connect with others, and all things like that. I think the phases that we go through where we are alone, and the more alone you are, the longer you're in isolation, because there's different types of isolation, isn't it? There's like isolation where there are people around you but you're just not connecting with them, and then there's isolation where like literally there's no one around you and there's no one in touch, and there is no one to call. And the different types of isolation. And what I found is the deeper the isolation and the deeper sense of loneliness that you can release, probably the more of your identity and the more of the ego is being released. So therefore, the opportunity to evolve and grow and come out the other side, with more maturity, with more experience, with more depth of character, if you like, less emotional baggage, less vulnerability, more strength and resilience. All of that comes through. They kind of like go hand in hand in that process. It can be like deeply, deeply spiritual. I find There can be phases of growth, most certainly, absolutely, with other people when we're looking at spirituality. But I mean, it can't really be denied, can it? Like all the spiritual teachings, more like in religions, have phases of isolation, like Buddha's story, Jesus' story. They all involve this wilderness, like going off in the wilderness. It was like a rite of passage in like Australia. The Aboriginals have like walkabout phase at the beginning early of life for like young, I think it was particularly boys, but before they came back as men, like a phase of real isolation, like be absolutely in your own self, in your own power, your own vulnerability. And then when you come out of it, you will have grown. Like it's unavoidable to not grow when you're in a period of isolation. But when we can do it consciously, then we can grow not necessarily quicker, in more beneficial ways, or at least with less resistance, with less additional suffering or struggle that we might attach to it. In most circumstances, it's literally the resistance to what's happening that causes suffering. So loneliness, the emotions, the sensation, the feeling of loneliness is being alone and resisting being alone. Like if we're alone and we choose to be alone, you don't feel lonely. You're just enjoying your own company or appreciating your own space or doing your own thing, whatever it might be. The actual sensation of loneliness, that longing, is like, I'm alone and I don't want to be. So the resistance, the not wanting to be, the fighting against the aloneness, is the suffering of loneliness. So I found the spiritual growth often comes from the counteracting of that, is like surrendering, the releasing of the resistance, accepting. And this can be like why it's all linked with the grief process as well. We'll dive more into that, like I say, in the next episode if you're interested. So do like and subscribe, click the notifications, and look out for the next Love Fools, where we'll talk a lot about grief and how this like links with loneliness. When we surrender into it and let go of the idea I should be with other people, I could be with other people, or whatever wounds we might have, there's a reason why other people don't want to be with me, then I'm not capable of being around other people, whatever stories it is that we're telling ourselves about this phase of isolation, solitude, loneliness, that cause the loneliness. Once we've let that go, once we can detach, once we can release and surrender into it, and then potentially even learn to embrace it. All right, well, I am alone. Some things I can't change. If this phase is this phase, I might as well accept it for what it is. Find some peace within that. Right, I have this period of being alone. I don't have many friends, or I don't have people to rely on. I haven't got people relying on me, whatever your circumstances might be. We can then use that place. We can use that phase of our life and actually learn about ourselves deeply. We can learn how to regulate, how to calm our nervous system, what we need to stay grounded, develop our intuition and understand our own emotions. What do all these emotions feel like? Where do we feel them in our body? What does it mean when I have this sensation? And when we can find our sense of self, right? It's the only way I can describe it. It's like when your energy, when you've cut off all of the people and places and stuff, and you have this period of isolation, you get used to your energy just being you, right? And as someone who is very empathic and intuitive, I don't even know if I'd ever really experienced that. And even in my first phases of solitude, when I wasn't consciously aware enough. So it was only later phases of solitude that I really realized this is what I feel like without any other influence. And it's like, oh, there's peace under all of that. There's a stillness. That's why tools like mindfulness, meditation can all help with finding that, right? There's lots of stuff that we can support with that sort of thing at Love School. But when you find that, right, when you can find that, then you meet these peaks or different emotions and then learn how to process, learn how to regulate them. So you know yourself, and you can only do that alone. So you know yourself, you know your emotional processes, you know how you can regulate, you know how you can emotionally express, you know how you feel in certain circumstances. Then when we meet other people, like intuition is on point. Suddenly it becomes like glaringly obvious if somebody is not good in our energy field, or we pick that vibe up really quickly and easily if somebody else is causing a dysregulation in us. And it might be like, oh, well, is this my dysregulation? Or am I picking up theirs? So this is like how intuition develops. So especially if you are psychically aware, empathic, naturally sensitive, hypersensitive, anything like that, right? These periods of isolation are not like a punishment. They're meant to, when we look at them spiritually, they're meant to help you develop those skills so that you know through this discernment practice, you know then one that you're picking something up. Like, oh, like I was totally calm. I was baseline calm, right? I started feeling anxiousness, this person come in, or this person come in, and I started feeling anxiousness. And then you've got enough kind of insight ultimately in the end to go, well, is this my anxiousness? Am I anxious of them? Is this something, and you might not even want to question that straight away, you know what I mean? Especially if you're feeling something like that, I would listen to that and maybe create a distance quite quickly. But if you want to dive into it, we're getting into some deeper nitty-gritty stuff now. It can be like, well, am I feeling anxious? Is something going on in me? Is this bringing up one of my triggers or something that's happened, a wound with me? And this is why it's really helpful to regulate your own trauma and work through your own trauma wounds, because once they're cleared, they don't get triggered as much or as often. So when we get to that point where you're like, well, I don't have that wound anymore, I'm picking up on them. They have anxiety. They have unresolved trauma. And then you can do with that information what you will. But it's not possible to find that place when you're always around and connected with other people. In my experience, anyway. Obviously, if you've had a different experience, let me know in the comments. I know some people like go through spiritual processes in communities, in groups. I mean, I have spent time like in the past in like groups and even like in church groups and things, psychic development groups and things. And that's all been part of my learning process over the years. But actually, to fine tune, to be able to know my baseline and find my regulation and everything, and then for my intuition to like level up to a point where of discernment where I'm like, well, actually, I know I don't have those wounds anymore. Or if I do, I know what my wounds feel like. I know what it feels like in my body when my nervous system is triggered or when my wounds are active. And once, like I say, there's less of them and you're very aware of your own process, and you can pick up really, really clearly like someone else's anxiety or something, like I say, someone else's joy, even whatever it might be. Oh, they're really excited. What's going on there? Like you just have that intuition, and that's what that intuitive process is. That's what being like an empath can be used for in the positive, evolved side. It can be really stressful when you're like in it and you're just picking up other people's shit all the time. Like I say, and that's certainly not going to help the healing and recovery process if that's what you're going through. And that's why we have these phases. And if you start looking at it like that, like surrender into it, like, oh, this is an opportunity for growth for me. This is an opportunity for me to figure out me, work on my stuff so I can grow from it, through it, past it. You can also like find this like stretch of our self-trust, our own ability to take care of ourselves. So I want to like, the elastic band is the way, and like I'm visualizing it right now, but we start to feel a pull, right? It's like a pattern we'll have of how long we can be by ourselves or what emotions we might be facing before we might naturally like go external. So take this internal experience and try and externalize it to either seek approval or seek validation or even seek comfort from other people. And at times that can like, the more that we do that, if we do that too often, it stops our growth, right? Because this expanding of this period of how long we can go self-regulating, self-approving, self-validating, self-comforting, self-soothing helps us to grow, right? We're less dependent on other people. We're not relying on other people to fill our cup, to fill us up, to meet our own needs. And if we keep reaching out for other people, right? If we don't battle with this loneliness feeling and get comfortable in the loneliness, and then the loneliness goes away and you just get comfortable in the aloneness and actually be able to meet your own needs, we can reach out to other people too much and it can disempower us and it can actually stop our growth journey. Other people can enable us even at times when, if we had stayed alone, we would have overcome that. But because someone else, like, oh, yes, well, it's okay to feel like this, or it's okay for that, or yes, have this, when actually being denied that could have been exactly what we needed to expand, to grow, to move past and shift past that phase in our life. Because other people don't know our process, they don't know what we need, and we grow. And other people might also resist our change. They might not want us to grow. They might not feel comfortable or like that. My healing and recovery journey, I talk about it a lot, has always been after a spiritual, well, has always been, I was going to say, like spiritual in its nature, after a spiritual awakening and an awareness of my relationship with God. So for me, in those moments, reaching out to God or spirit has been more helpful than reaching out to people. And then, do you know what? There's times when, especially when you can surrender into that process, even God and spirit will leave you. They never abandon you, like God never abandons you, like, it's always there. But God, when we're like tapping into like an energy of wanting to evolve for our highest good, whatever you want to call it, God, spirit, the universe, our higher self, whatever it is, this higher intelligence, higher power, this desire to grow and evolve and be more, better, bigger, stronger, whatever it is, right? That desire that humans have to take up the next space, that will never enable us to stay small. So there's been times in my life when I've even overly relied on that and then felt that connection dissipate and feel like, even then you're like, oh my God, I'm even being abandoned by this. And then that's just another wound, like a more deeper wound coming up to be dealt with. And then again, when you can fill that yourself, fill that void yourself, you can grow, and it deepens your connection within God, spirit, your higher self, whatever you mean. Like every process, when you commit into especially seeing it from this higher perspective, right? Loneliness is seeing something from a lack and not wanting it because we would rather have the past, right? And fear in the future. If we can embrace that we can be better through this experience, even if it's maybe uncomfortable or painful in the growth process, it deepens our connection to ourselves, but then to those forces beyond our control, to God, to consciousness, to nature, to the higher power, whatever it is. That kind of process begins to heal our attachment styles and our attachment wounds and things. Because then I've found after periods of isolation, I'll know like a sign of when I'm moving out of it. So when the healing has happened, when the recovery is completing. I mean, it's always an ongoing process, right? We're always healing, growing, recovering, but there's like phases, right? When a phase like that chapter, if you like, that wound is like really mended and the recovery process, and you've been in isolation, it's like a great sign to know that that's happened is when we're seeking to reconnect again. So when we do have energy then to connect with others, when it's not a drain anymore. So we are being able to fill ourselves, we are like filling ourselves with everything we've learned through this process. We are able to hold this new vitality of our new energy from our, this evolution process. And now we want to go out in the world. Now we want to offer it to other people without it draining us from a positive place, a place of opportunity. So it's like you're not then reaching out to people from a place of desperation, a place of fear or lack. It's like you're then reaching out to people from this place of wholeness, from a choice and a willingness to connect, from a place of giving, not seeking, not pulling, trying to get things from other people, like seeking validation or anything like that. We're like just going out into the world as ourselves. And that's kind of when we know that phase of healing is kind of running its course and we're coming to a completion of that and we're ready for the next level of our life. That's like an excellent sign for that. We're kind of in more of our authentic self. Like we've gone through this change, we've been able to fill ourselves up, we've healed, we've recovered ourselves, we know who we are, what we want from life, from other people, from connections. We're now willing to go out in the world and get it and meet the world in our authentic selves. So we're prepared to meet the world and face the consequences of being who we are now. And that can take, they can, say, we're always healing and growing. So there might be challenges in that initially, as you're getting used to being this new version of yourself out in the world or whatever, it might making the changes that might have to come with that. But that's like the new chapter, isn't it? That's like the renewal as you're going through into the next phase. So that's kind of for me, like the pattern and the swing and the point of isolation and loneliness as we go into the world again. It's like healing our attachment wounds in many ways. So we're like not going in the world with like anxious of other people or avoiding connection. We're going with this secure attachment seeking style. Like we want to connect with people, but we know we can be alone and we don't need them desperately. We don't need whatever we think they're going to fill us up with, because we fill that up in ourselves. And we're going out in the world knowing that the connection is an addition to us. It's not making up for any lost part of us or wounded, hurt part of us. It's like an addition, a welcome addition. And if it's not a welcome addition, I don't need it. So there's a lot of inner strength, healing, and therefore better love that comes through a period of isolation and loneliness. We can learn to love ourselves through that process. And then that means we love other people better. And then that means that we generally can love like this bigger experience of life and these ebbs and flows where we are sometimes without. So we can get to the point where we can enjoy the times where we have what we want and need. I'm gonna wrap up the episode here. Thank you so much for listening. If you are going through a period of loneliness, as part of a healing and recovery journey, or just you found yourself there and you're now realizing maybe this is an invitation for healing and recovery in my life and you want to embrace it, there is a free PDF at Love School. It just gives you some suggestions of ways you can dive into your loneliness, use the time of being alone to actually benefit yourself. So it's called Growing Through Loneliness. It's free for you to access. You can just go to loveschool.uk/lonely and you can download that guide, and then maybe it's just start reflecting on how you can benefit from this period that you're going through. If you're really struggling and if you would benefit from one-to-one support, remember I can't offer that. You can contact me either through loveschool.uk, through the contact page, mail at loveschool.uk, or you can go to loveschool.uk/Terri and book a one-to-one with me. I'm happy to support you to kind of shift whatever needs shifted, just so you can begin the process of embracing a loneliness phase, making the most of it, growing for yourself and not seeing it as a punishment. Look out, like I say, remember to like and subscribe to the channel here at YouTube. Look out for the next Love Fools. I'm going to dive into grief. Grief, like I say, grief and loneliness can go hand in hand. So you might find the next episode, it'll be out next month, helpful. So for now, if this is something that's happening, that's going through in your life, I'd really recommend just kind of allowing this insight potentially to become part of your experience of being alone. Download the PDF, begin experimenting with some of the suggestions in there if you haven't done that already. And I'll see you next month on Love Fools. Thank you so much for being here. I'll see you next time. Thank you for listening to this episode of Love Fools, where we have been exploring and embodying the universal language of love. Love Fools is brought to you as part of Love School, where we explore what it means to love self, others, and everything. For more information, come and have a look at our site, www.loveschool.uk.